Olorun was a village known for its peace and calm. Surrounded by green forests and a clear river, the people of Olorun lived simple lives. But all of that changed when people began to disappear. First, it was Obi, a 7-year-old little boy. His mother had sent him to fetch water from the stream as he often did. But hours passed, and Obi did not return. His family called out his name, their voices echoing through the village, but Obi was nowhere to be found. The villagers searched every corner of the forest. The chief, Baba Olufemi, sent his best men to look for the boy. They scoured the woods, the riverbanks, and even the hills beyond the village. Days passed, and still, there was no sign of Obi. The disappearance of a child shook the village to its core, but they tried to remain calm. Some believed that perhaps the boy had wandered too far and gotten lost. But soon the disappearances became more frequent. An old woman named Neka, known for sitting by the road selling fruits, vanished in the middle of the day. She had been sitting by her usual spot under the baobab tree, her basket full of ripe oranges. A passerby noticed her absence when her basket was left behind, untouched. Neka too was gone without a trace. Fear spread across Olorun like wildfire. The disappearances sent shockwaves through the village. Mothers no longer allowed their children to play outside, and the streets grew empty. Fathers began returning home early, reluctant to stay out in the fields after sunset. No one dared to walk alone, not even during the daylight hours. The tight-knit community was unraveling under the weight of an invisible threat. The anxiety reached new heights when Aid, one of the village's most hard-working farmers, disappeared without a trace. Aid had left early one morning to tend to his crops. His wife expected him back before dusk, but when night fell, he had not returned. The next morning, villagers went out to search his farm, but they found only his tools lying in the fields. Aid was nowhere to be found. With each disappearance, the fear deepened. The villagers began to speak in hushed tones about dark forces at work. Baba Olufemi, the village chief, tried everything he could to find the missing villagers. He sent messengers to neighboring villages, seeking their help and advice, but no one had answers. The disappearances remained a mystery, and there were no signs of a struggle, no clues to follow. Whispers about evil spirits roaming the village at night began to spread. Some said the spirits were angry, taking people one by one as punishment for a wrong the village had unknowingly committed. Others suggested it might be a curse or the work of dark magic. "We must remain strong and protect our village," Baba Olufemi said during a village meeting. His voice was firm, but the fear in his eyes was hard to miss. He urged the villagers to stay united, but despite his words, fear had already taken root. The disappearances had no explanation, and the shadow of dread continued to hang over Olorun like a dark cloud. No one knew who or what was behind the vanishings, and the village, once full of life and laughter, was now gripped by silence and unease. Amidst all the fear and confusion that gripped Olorun, there was one thing that never seemed to change: the irresistible smell of pepper soup that filled the air every evening. This comforting scent came from a small shop owned by Mama Iyabo, a woman who had recently come to the village from a neighboring town. She made the best pepper soup anyone had ever tasted. Her shop was always crowded. No matter how tense or anxious the villagers were about the disappearances, they couldn't resist the pull of her hot, spicy, and flavorful soup. People from all corners of Olorun lined up, eager to get their hands on a bowl. Even with all the fear lingering in the air, the lines outside her shop were longer than ever. What made Mama Iyabo's pepper soup so popular wasn't just the rich, spicy broth. It was the meat. The meat in her soup was tender, soft, and fell apart with every bite. It was unlike anything the villagers had tasted before. Each piece melted in their mouths, bursting with flavor. Many people would buy her soup in large portions and pair it with rice, pounded yam, or boiled plantains, making it a complete and satisfying meal. The meat became a topic of conversation in the village. "How does she make it so tender?" people would ask one another as they savored the dish. The texture and taste was so perfect that some joked it must have come from a magical animal. Others wondered if it was a secret recipe passed down from her ancestors. But it wasn't just the taste that made Mama Iyabo's pepper soup popular. It was also incredibly affordable. In times when many families were struggling due to the growing fear and uncertainty, her low prices made the pepper soup even more appealing. People could hardly believe how cheap it was, especially considering the quality. Even in hard times, everyone could afford a bowl of Mama Iyabo's soup. There was something unusual, though. Despite the growing tension and fear caused by the mysterious disappearances, Mama Iyabo's shop never seemed affected. Other businesses in the village had grown quiet, with people too afraid to leave their homes unless necessary. But her stall remained busy, as if the disappearances didn't exist. People would even argue over who got served first, with lines stretching longer than they had ever been. Sometimes, small fights would break out over the soup, each person desperate to get their share. But Mama Iyabo herself was not like the other women in the village. While her food was comforting, she was anything but. She was known for her sharp tongue and cold demeanor. Unlike other traders who welcomed their customers with smiles and kind words, Mama Iyabo never smiled. Her expression was always stern, her eyes cold. If anyone dared to complain about the long wait, she had no patience for them. "Do you want the soup or not?" she would snap, her voice icy. "If you don't like it, leave. There are plenty of others who will take your place." The villagers found her attitude harsh, but no one could deny that the soup was worth it. No matter how rudely she treated them, people always returned, their cravings overpowering their need for politeness. The pepper soup, with its tender meat and rich, spicy flavor, was simply irresistible. Mama Iyabo's popularity continued to grow, and while the rest of the village seemed to crumble under the weight of fear and uncertainty, her business thrived. People kept coming back, night after night, unable to stay away from her cooking, even as whispers about the disappearances grew louder. As Mama Iyabo's pepper soup business continued to thrive, the other food vendors in Olorun couldn't help but notice. While the village was gripped by fear with people too scared to step out of their homes unless necessary, Mama Iyabo's shop remained packed every evening. It didn't make sense to them. Her pepper soup wasn't just popular, it was too popular, and her prices were impossibly low for the quality she was offering. Among the vendors, none was more frustrated than Auntie Kemi. She had been selling food in the village for years and was known for her own special dishes. But ever since Mama Iyabo set up her shop, business had dried up. Auntie Kemi's once loyal customers were now flocking to Mama Iyabo, leaving her stall nearly empty. Each evening she watched as people eagerly lined up for Mama Iyabo's soup, ignoring the other vendors like they had never existed. It wasn't just Auntie Kemi who was upset. Several other vendors who sold pepper soup, snacks, and local dishes had noticed the same thing. They couldn't understand how Mama Iyabo managed to sell her soup so cheaply, especially with the amount of tender, juicy meat she put in every bowl. It wasn't possible. Something didn't add up. One evening, after another slow day, a few of the vendors decided they had had enough. A small group of them gathered near Auntie Kemi's stall, whispering and glancing over at Mama Iyabo's crowded shop. "How does she do it?" one of the women, Fatima, muttered under her breath. "She sells more than the rest of us combined, and her meat. Have you tasted it? It's like nothing I've ever had before. And she charges half of what we do in this economy." "I've been wondering the same thing," another vendor. "The cost of meat is high for everyone. So how is she buying so much and still selling it at those prices? Something's not right." The women nodded in agreement, their frustration growing by the minute. They were all struggling to make ends meet, barely selling enough to cover their expenses, yet Mama Iyabo was selling more than anyone, and her prices were the lowest in the village. "We should ask her," Fatima said suddenly, her voice determined. "Let's go talk to her directly. She needs to explain herself." The others exchanged glances, some hesitant, but the idea had already taken root. They marched over to Mama Iyabo's stall, their faces set in determination. As they approached, Mama Iyabo was busy serving a long line of customers, her usual scowl on her face as she ladled out bowls of steaming hot pepper soup. The delicious aroma filled the air, but the women weren't there for her food. Fatima, the boldest among them, spoke up first. "Mama Iyabo," she called, her voice loud enough to turn a few heads. "We need to talk to you." Mama Iyabo barely looked up from her pot, stirring the soup with a long wooden spoon. "If you want soup, get in line like everyone else," she said coldly, not bothering to hide her annoyance. "We're not here for soup," Fatima said firmly. "We're here to ask how it's possible that you sell so much meat at such low prices and still make a profit. The cost of meat has gone up for everyone, but somehow you're selling it cheaper than any of us. How?" Mama Iyabo's eyes flickered with irritation, but she kept her focus on the soup, ladling another bowl and handing it to a waiting customer. "If you can't run your business, that's not my problem," she said, her voice sharp. "Maybe you should work harder. My prices are my concern, not yours." Fatima wasn't satisfied with the answer. "We're all struggling and you know it," she pressed. "We just want to understand how you're doing it. Where are you getting your meat from? It's not normal to sell so much for so little." This time, Mama Iyabo stopped stirring. She straightened up and turned her full attention to the group of women standing before her. Her expression was hard, her eyes cold. "My business is none of yours," she said slowly, her voice low but filled with menace. "I sell my soup how I want. If you can't compete, that's your problem, not mine. Now, if you don't want to buy anything, I suggest you leave." The harshness of her tone took the women by surprise. They exchanged uneasy glances but didn't back down. "You may have your customers now, but remember, Olorun is a small village," Sade said, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. "We all know each other here. It would be wise to treat people better." Mama Iyabo let out a bitter laugh. "Wise?" she repeated mockingly. "I've done just fine without needing your advice, thank you. Now, if you don't want soup, go back to your stalls and stop wasting my time." With that, she turned her back on them, continuing to serve her eager customers. The vendors stood there, stunned for a moment, before turning away in frustration. Fatima's face was red with anger. Sade muttered under her breath as they walked back to their own stalls. But standing a little farther away, watching the scene unfold with a clenched jaw, was Auntie Kemi. She had seen the whole confrontation, and hearing Mama Iyabo's dismissive words only fueled the fire burning inside her. Auntie Kemi had already been bitter about losing her customers to this newcomer, but now, watching the way Mama Iyabo dismissed her fellow vendors so easily, her frustration turned into full-blown anger. The disappearances in Olorun had not stopped. Despite the fear that gripped the village, people continued to vanish without a trace, young and old, men and women alike. The village elders, led by Baba Olufemi, gathered often to discuss the matter, but they were left frustrated. There were no solid clues, only baseless speculations, rumors and whispers that filled the air. The village seemed to be losing hope, as no one knew where to begin or what to do. Baba Olufemi spoke gravely during their most recent meeting. "We have searched the forests, the rivers, and every path that surrounds Olorun. There is no sign of our missing people. It's as if they have vanished into thin air." The elders nodded in agreement, their faces lined with worry and fear. But despite their efforts, nothing had been found. The disappearances were a mystery, and the village, once full of life, was now haunted by fear and suspicion. Though some whispered about evil spirits or curses, no one had any real evidence. They were trapped, helpless in the face of an invisible enemy. While everyone in the village seemed to adore Mama Iyabo and her famous pepper soup, there was one person who could not bring herself to enjoy it: Amaka. Amaka and her younger brother Chuka had grown up as orphans. Their parents had died when they were still children, leaving the two of them to fend for themselves. They had always been close, relying on each other for support. Amaka, being the older sibling, had taken on the role of protector. She worked hard, making sure that Chuka had food to eat, clothes to wear, and a roof over his head. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and that had been enough. But now, Chuka was gone. He had been one of the people who disappeared, and Amaka was left alone, haunted by the loss. Chuka had loved Mama Iyabo's pepper soup. He had eaten there almost every day before he disappeared. The day before he went missing, he had been seen at her stall, smiling and chatting with other villagers as he enjoyed a steaming bowl of her famous soup. Now he was gone, just like the others. Unlike the other villagers, Amaka did not trust Mama Iyabo. From the moment Mama Iyabo arrived in Olorun, something about her felt off to Amaka. She was rude, arrogant, and unlike most people in the village, she had no friends or close ties. Yet, despite this, Mama Iyabo had grown wealthy and influential in a very short time. Her pepper soup business flourished, and no one questioned how she managed to sell such large portions of tender, succulent meat at prices no one could compete with. The villagers were too enamored with her delicious soup to ask questions, or perhaps, Amaka thought bitterly, they simply didn't care. But Amaka's suspicions had started to grow. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just Mama Iyabo's attitude or her sudden rise to wealth that bothered her. It was the timing. The disappearances had begun not long after Mama Iyabo's arrival, and yet no one seemed to connect the dots. How could it be that the disappearances had increased, yet the one person who seemed untouched by the fear was Mama Iyabo? Was her pepper soup really that good that people could overlook everything else? Amaka's unease grew deeper as she thought about her brother. He was the only family she had left, and the thought of losing him forever was unbearable. She had to act fast. If there was any chance of saving him, if he was still alive, she would need to uncover the truth. And her instincts told her that the truth was somehow tied to Mama Iyabo. Driven by her growing suspicions and the pain of losing her brother, Amaka decided it was time to investigate. She couldn't do it alone, so she decided to approach Auntie Kemi. Auntie Kemi had once been a successful vendor in the village, known for her own delicious soups and local dishes. But ever since Mama Iyabo had arrived, Auntie Kemi's business had suffered. Her customers had all flocked to Mama Iyabo's stall, leaving her shop nearly empty. Amaka thought that if anyone would be willing to listen to her suspicions about Mama Iyabo, it would be Auntie Kemi. One afternoon, Amaka found Auntie Kemi sitting at her stall, looking tired and defeated. She approached her carefully, unsure of how to bring up her suspicions. "Kemi," Amaka began softly, "I've been thinking about all these disappearances, and Mama Iyabo." Auntie Kemi looked up, her face expressionless. "What about her?" she asked, her voice flat. "I don't trust her," Amaka said bluntly. "I think something is wrong. Chuka disappeared after eating at her stall, and he's not the only one. There are others too. I think there's a connection between Mama Iyabo's success and the people who've gone missing." For a moment, Auntie Kemi didn't respond. She stared at Amaka, then she sighed deeply. "Amaka, I've lost my business because of that woman," she said. "I've lost everything I've worked for. But as for the disappearances, I don't know. All I want is to move on and start over." Amaka was taken aback. "Move on," Auntie Kemi nodded. "I've decided to leave Oloron. There's no future for me here anymore. People don't want my food. They all run to Mama Iyabo. I'm moving to the neighboring village to start again. I just want to mind my own business." Amaka was stunned. She had hoped Auntie Kemi would share her suspicions, but instead she seemed resigned. She didn't care about uncovering the truth. She just wanted to leave. "But Kemi, aren't you even a little curious?" Amaka pressed. "Doesn't it bother you that all of this started when she came to the village?" Auntie Kemi shook her head. "It doesn't matter anymore, Amaka. People here don't care about what's happening." With that, Auntie Kemi stood, gathering her things. "I wish you luck, Amaka, but I can't help you. Not anymore." Amaka watched her walk away, feeling a deep sense of frustration and loneliness. She couldn't believe Auntie Kemi was leaving, that she didn't care about finding the truth. But Amaka wasn't going to give up. If no one else in the village would listen, then she would have to investigate on her own. She couldn't let her brother's disappearance be in vain. Chuka was all she had left, and if there was any chance of finding him, she would have to act quickly. She knew, deep down, that something was wrong with Mama Iyabo, and she was determined to uncover the truth, no matter what it took. Amaka's determination to uncover the truth about Mama Iyabo had only grown stronger. Her brother was still missing, and deep in her heart, she knew that Mama Iyabo was somehow connected to the disappearances. She couldn't sit back any longer. She had to act, and tonight was the night. It was late, and the village of Olorun was quiet. Amaka had been watching Mama Iyabo's shop from a distance, hidden in the shadows. She had noticed something strange over the past few nights. After the village had gone to sleep, Mama Iyabo would leave her hut and disappear into the night. No one else seemed to notice, or perhaps they were too afraid to care, but Amaka had been paying close attention. Tonight, she decided to follow her. The night was cool, and the moon hung low in the sky. Amaka waited patiently, her heart racing, her breath shallow. She felt a small voice in her head telling her to go back, to give up this dangerous mission. But then, another voice whispered louder, urging her to stay. She thought of Chuka, her only family, and her resolve hardened. She had to know what Mama Iyabo was hiding. Just after midnight, when the village was completely still, and the only sounds were the distant croaks of frogs, Amaka saw Mama Iyabo emerge from her hut. She moved swiftly and cautiously, looking around to make sure no one was watching. She was dressed in dark clothing, blending into the night, and carried a large sack slung over her shoulder. Amaka's heart pounded as she watched Mama Iyabo walk through the village and head toward the forest, a place no one dared to go after sunset. The villagers believed the forest was dangerous at night, filled with spirits and creatures that wandered in the darkness. But Mama Iyabo seemed unafraid, and Amaka knew she had to follow her. Summoning all her courage, Amaka crept silently behind, staying low and hidden in the shadows. The forest was dense, and the trees loomed tall above her, their branches casting eerie shapes in the moonlight. The further they went, the more Amaka's fear grew, but she didn't let it stop her. She stayed a safe distance behind Mama Iyabo, careful not to make any noise. The darkness of the forest pressed in on her, but she was determined to see where this path would lead. After what felt like hours of walking, Mama Iyabo reached a small clearing deep in the forest. Amaka crouched behind a thick bush, watching as Mama Iyabo stopped near a hidden cave that Amaka had never seen before. It was tucked away in the shadows, invisible to anyone who didn't know it was there. Amaka's breath hitched as she watched Mama Iyabo set down the sack and open it. What she saw next made her blood run cold. From the sack, Mama Iyabo pulled out a lifeless human body. It was the body of a traveler, someone who had passed through the village weeks ago and had mysteriously gone missing. Amaka recognized the man instantly. The villagers had searched for him for days, but they had found nothing. Now, here he was, limp and pale, lying in the clearing in front of Mama Iyabo. Amaka gasped, but quickly covered her mouth, her hands shaking. Tears streamed down her face as she realized the horrifying truth. Mama Iyabo had been behind the disappearances all along. She wanted to scream, to run back to the village and tell everyone, but she forced herself to stay quiet, her whole body trembling with shock. She couldn't let Mama Iyabo see her. She had to stay hidden. She wiped her tears away and peeked through the branches, barely able to hold herself together as she watched what unfolded next. Mama Iyabo began to work with the precision of a seasoned butcher. She pulled out a sharp knife and began cutting the body into neat portions, as though she were preparing meat for one of her famous pepper soups. Amaka watched in horror as the pieces of flesh were carefully cut, placed into smaller bags and packed away. It was a sight so gruesome that Amaka felt her stomach churn, but she couldn't look away. The truth had finally been revealed. The tender, succulent meat that Mama Iyabo had been serving to the villagers, the meat everyone praised for being so soft and delicious, was not from animals. It was human flesh. The missing villagers, the travelers, her brother Chuka, could they have all ended up like this? Hot tears continued to stream down Amaka's face as she realized the full extent of the horror. The people of Oloran had unknowingly been eating human flesh, served to them by Mama Iyabo. The woman everyone adored for her cooking had been turning her victims into food. Amaka's body shook with rage and disgust, but she knew she had to stay strong. She couldn't let her emotions betray her. As Mama Iyabo finished her gruesome task, Amaka carefully began to back away from the clearing. Her movements were slow and deliberate, each step light as a feather. She couldn't risk being seen now, not when she was so close to escaping. Her heart raced in her chest as she disappeared deeper into the shadows of the forest. Once she was far enough away, she turned and ran. She didn't stop until she reached the edge of the village, her lungs burning from the effort. Amaka leaned against a tree, catching her breath, her mind spinning with what she had just witnessed. She had to act quickly. She had to expose Mama Iyabo before anyone else could fall victim to her dark, twisted secret. And more than anything, she had to find out if there was any hope of saving Chuka. Amaka wiped her tears and steadied herself. She knew this wouldn't be easy, but she wasn't going to stop until Mama Iyabo was brought to justice. The people of Oloran needed to know the truth, no matter how horrifying it was. Amaka couldn't wait another day. After her terrifying discovery in the forest, she barely slept, her mind racing with thoughts of what she had seen and the horrors Mama Iyabo had been hiding. Her brother, Chuka, was still missing, and with every passing minute she feared that he too might have become a victim of Mama Iyabo's dark deeds. She had to act fast before anyone else disappeared. At the first light of dawn, Amaka hurried to the home of Baba Olufemi, the village chief. The sun was barely above the horizon when she knocked on his door, her heart pounding in her chest. Baba Olufemi, an elderly man with wisdom in his eyes and a heavy burden on his shoulders, opened the door and looked at her with concern. "Amaka, what brings you here so early, child?" he asked, sensing her urgency. "Baba, it's about my brother Chuka," Amaka said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "And about Mama Iyabo. I've seen something terrible, something that you need to know." Baba Olufemi's face tightened. He had known about the disappearances and the growing fear in the village, but he hadn't expected this. "Come in, child," he said, gesturing for her to enter. "Tell me everything." Inside, Amaka told him everything she had witnessed the night before. She described following Mama Iyabo into the forest, the hidden cave, and the horrifying sight of the lifeless body that Mama Iyabo had butchered like an animal. She spoke of her suspicions and how several of the missing villagers had been regular customers at Mama Iyabo's pepper soup stall. With each word, Baba Olufemi's expression darkened. At first, the chief was hesitant to believe her. Mama Iyabo had been in Oloron for some time now, and while she was known for being harsh and unfriendly, she had never given anyone reason to suspect something so horrifying. But Amaka was insistent, her voice full of desperation and fear for her brother. "I know it sounds unbelievable, Baba," she said, her voice trembling, "but I saw it with my own eyes. If we don't act now, more people will die. My brother, he's still missing, and I fear he might be next. We can't wait any longer." Baba Olufemi sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation sinking in. Finally, he nodded. "If what you say is true, Amaka, we must act quickly. I will gather a group of men to investigate tonight. We will catch Mama Iyabo in the act." That evening, as the sun set and the village grew quiet, Baba Olufemi gathered a group of the village's strongest men. Amaka stood by their side, anxious and determined. The men were armed with machetes and lanterns, their faces set with grim determination. Baba Olufemi himself led the way, his staff in hand. As darkness fell, they followed the same path Amaka had taken the night before, keeping to the shadows as they approached the forest. Amaka's heart raced as they crept through the trees, each step bringing them closer to the hidden cave where Mama Iyabo had performed her gruesome deeds. Just as they reached the clearing, they saw her. Mama Iyabo was there, carrying another large sack over her shoulder. She moved swiftly, unaware that she was being followed. The men hid behind trees and bushes, watching as she approached the cave. Then, as Mama Iyabo began to open the sack, Baba Olufemi stepped forward, his voice booming through the night. "Mama Iyabo!" Mama Iyabo froze, her eyes wide with shock as she turned to face the group. She saw the chief and the men standing behind him, their faces hard with anger. Amaka stood beside them, her eyes burning with fury. "Mama Iyabo," Baba Olufemi said, his voice filled with disbelief. "What have you been doing? Why have you been killing these people?" Mama Iyabo's face twisted in panic. She tried to run, but the men quickly surrounded her, blocking her path. With nowhere to go, Mama Iyabo's back was against the wall, literally and figuratively. She looked around desperately, but there was no escape. "Why, Mama Iyabo?" Baba Olufemi asked again, his voice full of pain. "Why have you been doing this?" Mama Iyabo's shoulders slumped, and for a moment it seemed as though she would remain silent. But then her expression changed. Her face contorted with guilt and fear, and she finally spoke. "I had no choice," she cried, her voice breaking. "I made a deal with dark spirits long ago, after my husband died. I had nothing, no food, no money. I wandered into the forest in desperation, and there I encountered them." The men and Amaka listened in horror as Mama Iyabo revealed her dark secret. She had joined an occult group that promised her wealth and success, but the price was steep. She had to offer human heads as sacrifices to the spirits in exchange for her prosperity. The bodies of her victims were used to make the very pepper soup that had made her famous. "The spirits demanded a sacrifice," she continued, her voice trembling. "If I didn't give them what they wanted, I would lose everything. I had no choice. It was the only way to survive." As Mama Iyabo confessed, Amaka's eyes scanned the area. She feared what she might find, but she had to know. She had to find her brother. With shaky steps, she moved toward the pile of bags near the cave, fear gripping her tightly. What if Chuka was among them? Her hands trembled as she tore through the pile, her breath quickening with each bag she opened. But to her surprise, and her horror, Chuka's body was not there. She didn't know whether to feel relief or despair. Was he still alive, or had something worse happened to him? Tears welled in her eyes as she turned back to Mama Iyabo, who had fallen silent. The villagers had already begun to gather, their faces filled with shock and disgust at the confession they had just heard. Amaka rushed forward and grabbed Mama Iyabo by the collar, her voice cracking with desperation. "Where is my brother? Where is Chuka?" she demanded, shaking the older woman violently. But Mama Iyabo remained silent, her eyes downcast. "Where is he?" Amaka screamed, tears streaming down her face, but Mama Iyabo refused to answer. Before Amaka could press further, the men gently pulled her away. Baba Olufemi stepped forward, his face grave. "Mama Iyabo will face judgment in the village square," he said, his voice filled with sorrow. "Her crimes will not go unpunished." The young men of the village dragged Mama Iyabo away, her face void of emotion. The villagers followed closely behind, murmuring in disbelief as they returned to the village. But for Amaka, the horror wasn't over. Chuka was still missing, and the fear of not knowing what had happened to him tore her apart. She had uncovered the truth about Mama Iyabo, but the fate of her brother remained a painful mystery. The news of Mama Iyabo's gruesome crimes spread through the village of Olorun like wildfire. The once beloved pepper soup seller had been caught red-handed, and her dark, horrific secret was now out in the open. Outraged, the villagers dragged her back to the village square, their faces twisted with anger and grief. The air buzzed with cries of disbelief and sorrow as families of the missing mourned their loved ones. Mama Iyabo, once respected for her delicious pepper soup, now stood before the village elders, her eyes downcast, her body trembling. The people of Olorun could barely contain their fury. She had betrayed their trust, fed them human flesh, and caused the disappearance of their loved ones. The village elders, including Baba Olufemi, sat in judgment, their faces grim with the weight of what they had learned. "She will pay for her crimes," Baba Olufemi declared, his voice stern. "The spirits may have twisted her mind, but nothing justifies the evil she has committed." The trial was brief. There was no need for lengthy deliberations. Mama Iyabo had confessed, and the evidence was clear. The villagers, many of whom had lost family members to her wickedness, could not be swayed by mercy. Their hearts were heavy with grief and rage. One by one they picked up stones, their hands shaking, their eyes wet with tears. As the village square filled with cries of anger, the stones flew. Mama Iyabo's once proud figure crumbled beneath the weight of the villagers' justice. It wasn't long before her lifeless body lay in the dirt, her face bloodied and bruised. The villagers had done what they believed was right, but the pain of their losses remained. Her punishment didn't end there. After her death, the villagers set fire to her home and her pepper soup stall. Flames licked the sky as her once popular business burned to the ground, leaving nothing but ash. The people of Olorun watched as the fire consumed everything, the smoke rising high, carrying away the last remnants of her twisted legacy. Yet, amid the chaos of Mama Iyabo's trial, Amaka was nowhere to be found. She had left the village square earlier that day, her mind focused on finding her brother, Chuka. Hope and fear warred within her. Mama Iyabo had refused to say what had happened to him, but Amaka refused to believe her brother was gone. She had to find him no matter what. Her heart pounded as she searched the outskirts of the village, calling his name. The sound of the villagers' rage echoed in the distance, but Amaka's world was centered on one thing: Chuka. Suddenly, a familiar voice called out from behind a row of trees. "Amaka!" She froze. She turned around, and there, stepping out from the shadows, was her brother, Chuka. He looked tired and weak, but he was alive. Tears of relief flooded her eyes as she rushed toward him, throwing her arms around him, hugging him tightly. "Chuka, I thought I'd lost you," she cried, holding him close. "I'm okay, Amaka," Chuka whispered, his voice hoarse. I managed to escape." Amaka pulled back, her hands gripping his arms, desperate for answers. "How? What happened? Where have you been all this time?" Chuka took a deep breath, his eyes dark with the memories of his ordeal. "I was taken by Mama Iyabo. I remember eating her pepper soup that day, like I always did. But that night, something felt wrong. I started feeling dizzy, weak. I realized too late that she had poisoned me." Amaka's eyes widened in shock. "Poisoned?" Chuka nodded. "She lures her victims by poisoning their food, making them too weak to fight back. Then she drags them deep into the forest. That's where she took me, to a hidden spot where she keeps her victims tied up, waiting for whatever dark ritual she performs." Amaka's stomach twisted in horror. "How did you escape?" "I was lucky," Chuka continued. "There was another man there, a hunter. He had been taken too, but he was strong enough to break free from the ropes. He untied me and helped me escape. If it weren't for him, I wouldn't be standing here." Amaka's heart swelled with gratitude. "Where is he?" "I need to thank him." Chuka turned, gesturing toward the trees, and from the shadows stepped the man who had saved his life. He was tall and handsome, with dark, intense eyes and the quiet confidence of someone who had faced danger before. His clothes were worn from his time in the forest, but there was a calm strength about him that immediately captivated Amaka. "This is the hunter who saved me," Chuka said, his voice filled with admiration. "His name is Obina." Amaka's breath caught as she looked up at Obina, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't quite explain. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving my brother." Obina smiled gently, his dark eyes warm as they met hers. "I'm just glad I could help. No one should have to go through what we did." Amaka's gratitude was overwhelming. She felt a strange connection to Obina, something deeper than just thankfulness for her brother's rescue. There was something about him that drew her in. His bravery, his quiet strength, the way he had risked his life to save others. As they stood together in the fading light of the day, surrounded by the aftermath of the village's justice, Amaka couldn't help but feel that this was only the beginning of a new chapter in her life. For now, she had her brother back, and Mama Iyabo had faced her punishment. But as Amaka's eyes lingered on Obina, she knew that her life had been changed forever by the events of the past few days. In the days following the downfall of Mama Iyabo, the village of Olorun began to slowly heal. The dark cloud of fear and suspicion that had hung over the village for so long was finally lifting. The people no longer had to wonder who or what was behind the disappearances, and there was a sense of closure, though the pain of their losses would never fully fade. Amaka, once just another face in the village, was now honored as a hero. The villagers gathered in the village square to celebrate her bravery. It had been Amaka's courage and determination that had exposed the truth about Mama Iyabo and brought justice to those who had gone missing. She was the only one who dared to think beyond the obvious, who refused to be blinded by Mama Iyabo's delicious pepper soup, even when everyone else was content to look the other way. "Amaka is our savior," Baba Olufemi declared before the gathered villagers. "Without her, we may never have uncovered the truth. She has saved us from a great evil, and for that, we are forever grateful." The villagers cheered and clapped, their faces filled with admiration and respect. Amaka, standing before them, felt a deep sense of gratitude to the gods for giving her the strength to find her brother and uncover the dark secret that had plagued the village. She had been through so much, but her heart was full of relief knowing that Chuka was safe and that Olorun could finally move forward. As the celebrations continued, Amaka's eyes found Obina's. He stood at the edge of the crowd, a quiet smile on his face as he watched her. Since that night in the forest, when he had saved her brother's life, the two of them had grown closer. Obina's bravery had left a lasting impression on Amaka, and she felt a connection to him that went beyond simple gratitude. There was something about him, his quiet strength, his kindness, the way he had risked his life without hesitation, that had drawn her in. Obina approached her after the ceremony, his dark eyes warm as they met hers. "You deserve all of this, Amaka," he said softly. "You were the only one who saw the truth when no one else did." "I couldn't have done it without you," Amaka replied, her heart full as she looked at him. "You saved Chuka, and I will always be grateful for that." They stood together for a moment, the sounds of the celebration fading into the background. In that quiet space, surrounded by the village they had helped save, Amaka and Obina felt a bond growing between them. They had both faced unimaginable danger, and they had come through it stronger. As they walked together through the village, Amaka felt at peace for the first time in what seemed like forever. Chuka was by her side, alive and well, and for that, she was endlessly thankful. The darkness that had once threatened to tear Olorun apart had been banished, and now there was room for new beginnings. The tale of Mama Iyabo's crimes and her dark descent spread far beyond the village of Olorun. It became a cautionary story told in neighboring villages, a reminder of the dangers of greed and desperation. Mama Iyabo had once been trusted, her pepper soup beloved by all, but behind the delicious meals and affordable prices had lurked a horror that no one had suspected, until Amaka's determination had brought it to light. The lesson was clear: greed and desperation could lead even the most trusted people down dark paths. It was always wise to question what seemed too good to be true, for sometimes the greatest evils were hidden in plain sight, masked by the things people often ignored. The villagers of Olorun, and those from the surrounding lands, learned to be more cautious. They understood that evil could wear the face of a friend, that danger could come from the most unexpected places. Trust, they realized, should never be blind. As for Amaka, she had become more than a sister to Chuka, more than just another villager in Olorun. She was their savior, the one who dared to look beyond the surface, the one who had saved them all. And as she and Obina continued to grow closer, sharing quiet moments together under the stars, it seemed that Amaka's journey, though filled with darkness, had led her to a place of light and hope. The story of Mama Iyabo's betrayal would be told for generations, but it would also be remembered as the story of Amaka, the brave girl who saved her village.